Hello, my name is Marcus. I'm the compiler of a collection of therapy quotes entitled Psychoanalytic Self-Awareness Quotes. This is TQ 961 and 962, as well as a redo of TQ 7 and 8. But before we begin, I noticed the crow has just arrived, two of them. Okay. 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 So if we're lucky, we'll see the blue jay as well. And yesterday we saw the fox, which was nice. Those are the three companion animals in this series: the crow, the blue jay, and the fox. Okay, TQ 961. Many of the ideas, desires, cravings which we have repressed in the course of life continue to live a life of their own in our unconscious mind, which at times exert a mysterious influence upon our conduct and upon our mental and physical health. We discover the presence of some of our repressed ideas only through the disturbances they may produce, just as astronomers discover the existence of an unseen planet by observing the influence it has on the course of other celestial bodies. The unconscious mind has been likened to an iceberg. Most of the berg, however, is hidden under the surface, and it is by powerful currents, invisible to the casual observer, and not by the wind, that the mass of floating ice is being driven irresistibly. Socrates was a thinker who realized the importance of the unconscious and of self-knowledge. His commandment, know thyself, and his theory of intellectual midwifery remind one strangely of the modern analyst's creed and methods. Some people call this idea of the existence of the unconscious as humanity's third narcissistic injury. Really, we're not 100%, we don't have 100% free will, that there's something in our memories that's still influencing us. So he describes it here that they continue to, our unconscious childhood memories, our painful memories, continue to live a life of their own in the unconscious mind. So that's what object relations theory is about, trying to conceptualize how is it, how does it work, or how might it operate, these unconscious memories, and how would they influence us in the present? If it happened in the past, why is it still influencing us in the present? The past is the past, the present is the present. So why is that there? So object relations theory, oh, hold on a sec, we got one of the crows back. Oh, okay. Okay. There they go. Okay. He seems a little undecided, right? Okay, I'll I'll just leave him. Oh, there he goes. I'll just leave him alone. So one theory about the unconscious is Fairbairn's idea of the endopsychic structure. So memories around a certain theme cluster and condense, meld together almost. So we're imagining maybe memories around a certain theme associate with each other, and they become like a little complex. A complex means just a grouping of memories around a certain theme. Now this compilation of memories around a certain theme, someone called it, because the baby thinks in images, right? So maybe the baby creates an image in his unconscious around this complex, around this cluster of memories. Someone called it a fantasized personification. Others call it an imago, to differentiate it from image, because the imago is created by the child's mind. So it's different from an image of what actually happened. So in object relations theory, this imago or fantasized personification of a cluster of memories is called an internal object. It sounds odd. It takes time to get used to it. It's an internal object. Just like in the external world, we have emotional interactions with people and places and things and ideas and books and birds and so on. So these are all called objects. Anything you have, any person or place or thing or idea that you have an emotional connection to, that, whatever that is, or whatever that person, it could be a company, organization or something, that's called an object. So it could be pretty much anything. Yeah. That's the external objects. So we call that external objects, right? Now we have internal objects. That's the theory. So these internal objects are of the other and are of the self. Now the internal objects of the other, the prototype, the first object was the mother, the actual mother. The first external object was the breast mother. Now sometimes the breast mother, or the mother simply, was satisfying. So the child has all of these memories of his experience with the mother being satisfying. Right. These memories condense, and in the imaginal world, it's like it's a fantasized personification. So the baby's feelings around being loved is that the satisfying mother is so heavenly, beautiful, wonderful. So in fairy tales and myths, the fantasized personification is of a goddess, a divine, lovely, all beautiful being who loves the child. So that's the image, or the imago, or the internal object of the satisfying other from the baby's point of view, linked to a part self-representation that's loved and satisfied. Sometimes the mother is unsatisfying. Okay, so that unsatisfying representation of the mother is subsplit into the enticing other and the rejecting other, because the baby at times had a great hope that his needs were going to get met, and then the mother rejected it. So the baby splits that. Right? So now you have the satisfying part representation of the other, the enticing representation of the other, linked and then quickly followed by the rejecting image of the other. Now the enticing and the rejecting image, sometimes we just, as an abbreviation, we'll just say the unsatisfying or the frustrating object. Now, so now in the endopsychic structure, there are three internal objects: satisfying, the good object, the enticing object, and the bad object, the rejecting object. Right? Linked to part self-representations, linked to these three parts. So this, the loved self, the enticed self, and then the unloved self, or the rejected self. Now there are other internal objects, but just to start somewhere, we'll go with those. Right. Now, Fairbairn has this thing called splitting of the ego. When there's trauma, much of the child's conscious ego gets submerged. It splits off from the ego, and it becomes an unconscious ego. Now, the unconscious ego is in relationship to these internal objects. There's dynamics going on here. They're alive. Now, depending how much trauma there was, that causes a lot of unconscious psychic pain. What happens is the unconscious ego is going to project any one of these 6 imagos onto the external world with the intention that the person's conscious ego will get a sense of his own internal object relations world. Grief is healed when it's witnessed by a caring other. So we are our own caring other. Our own unconscious ego is helping us to be our own caring other. The psyche seeks wholeness and healing and repair. So the psyche is sort of behind all of this. The psyche is getting the unconscious ego to project the imagos onto others, to get the person's own conscious ego to recognize or to consider, why does he have these opinions or strong attitude? Where's this coming from? It could be coming from his memories. These memories in the internal object relations world are what form the each internal object, part object, right? So when the baby has a secure attachment style with the mother, these split images of the other come together, and the split image of the self come together. That allows differentiation, and that allows whole object relations, and that's healthy, and that's psychological birth. Right? If the frustrating experiences with the mother outweigh the loving experiences with the mother, the baby has to keep these images split. The splitting defense mechanism means the baby can't recognize that when his mother's frustrating, that's his mother. He has to delude himself and think that that's not her, that's another person. He can only bond to a mother if he feels safe with the mother. So he has to use some mental gymnastics, or mental mechanisms, or operations of the mind, or windmills of the mind. So they're called defense mechanisms. So the primary initial defense mechanism the baby uses is called splitting. Okay, so the baby sees the mother as either a goddess or frightening something, and this frightening something he denies, puts in a box, splits off, rejects, and he thinks even it's not even his mother. But in reality, the mother is more frustrating than loving, but the child can't bond. Okay, the child has to safely feed from the mother for his survival. So he'll delude, he'll create some hallucination, he'll distort reality immensely so that he can feed. So he's lying to himself, obviously, but he's trying to survive. That's the drama of the gifted child. The child is ingenious that way, because biologically the child couldn't survive if he doesn't feed. And if the mother's too frightening, how does he feed? He can't feed if he's so scared of the mother. He has to feel that the mother's loving. How does he do it? Okay, well, he'll just say, no, that's this. So what he does is he'll focus on the positive side of the mother. But that's not enough. What does he then do? Okay, the reality of the mother being more frustrating, he'll just imagine that's not his mother. That's the splitting defense mechanism. Now, this satisfying part of the mother, it might be very limited. So what does the child then do? It's not enough just to use the splitting defense mechanism. So there's this thing called the moral defense. The child imagines himself to be like a little judge. He'll make the moral decision. All right, he'll make himself bad enough so that by comparison, this little good enough mother is good enough, so that now he can feed. But it's a huge distortion of himself. He devalues himself to make his mother good enough so that he can feed. That's called the moral defense by Fairbairn. So Fairbairn, right, offers this endopsychic structure model and a theory of the moral defense on how the baby can delude himself so that he can feed safely for his survival. Now Klein says The reason the baby's doing all of this is because of what she calls annihilation anxiety. The baby feels he can't survive if he doesn't do this. Right? Now, the result is there's going to be an image in the child's unconscious of the frustrating mother as being a demon, a frightening creature, a bad witch, an orgus, or some terrifying Medusa character, or some. Now that's okay. Now that leads to a client calls persecutory anxiety during the first 6 months. Now, if this doesn't get resolved by the age of 3 at the latest, the person's unconscious world, the person is still dealing with this unfinished dilemma of having experience of being traumatized by such a frightening, rejecting mother. Again, the baby interprets the mother's misattunements, the mother's unavailability, the mother not offering her maternal reverie, the mother not holding the baby and connecting with the baby. The baby needs to see that the mother recognizes and respects the baby as a person in his own right. The baby needs that. The mother doesn't offer that. The baby interprets that as being devalued and rejected by this frightening, terrifying imago, internal object. Okay, now this frightening creature is sometimes called the inner critic or the superego, or Verweer calls it the internal saboteur. Different terms for this frightening creature. Now, in the internal object relations world, the more traumatized it is down there, because that's a trauma, because the psyche seeks healing, it's going to get the person to project these images onto others in the environment to try to recreate or relive or re-experience the childhood situation so that the person can master it or handle it or manage it or get a better outcome, right? So he's caught doing that all the time because he can't live with that pain all the time. So he has to heal that pain. So he's got to recreate it, to redo it or something. Now, after the age of 5, all of this is pathological. It can't be done. So we've been saying it's repetition compulsion gone awry. Because after the age of 5, no one in the external world can offer what that person needed as a baby and change the past and change history. It's as if the baby thinks he's going to travel back in time in a time machine to undo what happened and get what he needed and have it all. If the baby got an insecure attachment style, that's the reality of the past. He can't change that. So, but the positive intention of the repetition compulsion is try to master that pain. That's sort of the positive intention. So this what he says here exerts a mysterious influence upon our conduct. This mysterious influence is the repetition compulsion. The person is projecting these 6 imagos, internal objects, onto others. For example, if they project the devalued part self-representation onto others, and then they identify with that frightening aggressor, called identification with the aggressor, then they will do to others what his mother did to him, to communicate that that's what his mother did to him. He's trying to communicate what happened to him as an attempt to master the trauma, to understand the trauma, to get a sense of what happened around the trauma. So he's going to act out and replay what happened, but he's going to flip the roles. He's going to put the victim side of himself onto others, identify with the aggressor. Okay. Berg calls that a negative magic gesture. He's trying to communicate to himself and to others that when he was a baby, that what he's doing to some non-threatening substitute other is what his mother did to him, because when he was a baby, he was a non-threatening substitute other for the mother. Right? Mysterious, okay, life force, because life force is object seeking, so the baby needs a secure object, a secure mother who's good enough. The baby didn't get that, so the soul is fragmented. So he's trying to recreate the traumatized scene to get a better outcome. It's as if he wants to. It's like that title of that comedy play, "I love you, you're perfect, now change." It's like he wants someone else to play his mother, be the mother, and then change so that he can get the good mother he never got to get a better out. But it can't be done after the age of 5. So either and then it becomes like Sisyphus. You're going to try again. It's a broken record. It's Sisyphus, right? And he might become caught in that. Okay, so they have so this idea of the existence of the unconscious. One metaphor was how astronomers discover planets. How did they discover the planet? First, they noticed some changes in some other celestial bodies. They noticed these stars and this. They noticed things changing around out there, and they thought, "What's causing these changes?" Then they finally came to the conclusion, "Oh, there's a planet nearby." Then they discovered the planet. So first they noticed the disturbance in the sky, then they found the planet. So that's like first noticing we're being dysfunctional, and noticing, oh, there's an unconscious planet within, and that kind of thing. Another metaphor is the famous one about the iceberg. So I just found a random one on the internet. So now what's moving? So let's imagine this as a person. What's moving the person? Is it the currents underneath, or is it the wind on the surface? So the metaphor is that it's the currents underneath. So that's the internal object relations world. The endopsychic structure is sort of moving the person. In what direction? He's moving the person to repeat the childhood scene. Now the wind on the top, that could be the person's, the air is a metaphor for thinking. So maybe the person has conscious thoughts, but he's overpowered by his unconscious thoughts if he's not aware of his unconscious thoughts. So that's why we keep saying, make the unconscious conscious, right? So reintegrate what we don't know about ourselves back into ourselves by making the unconscious conscious. Because if we're not conscious of our unconscious, it's going to compel us into the repetition compulsion. Now again, we're talking about the insecure attachment style. Those babies who got a secure attachment style with their mothers, very lucky. Very happy for them. They're very lucky. They achieved a psychological birth. They have access to the capacities of the real self. They can be themselves. They're not caught in this unconscious battle with the mother, trying to replay this scene with the mother, trying to get a better outcome. They're not caught in that. That's the dysfunctional living, the neurotic living, the repetition compulsion, right? So we're talking about healing from a developmental trauma of an insecure attachment style, meaning that when the person was a baby, the frustrating memories of the mother outweigh the satisfying memories. Remember, when the baby's frightened, he can't differentiate. When the baby feels safe, he can differentiate from the mother. Again, from birth to 6 months, the baby and the mother are fused as one psychologically. It's called the stage of fusion, the stage of symbiosis, the stage of undifferentiation. Baby doesn't know where he ends and his mother begins. Now, with enough love, the child feels safe enough to differentiate. Okay, he's halfway there. He differentiates. Now he has a sense of I, not I. He has a sense of himself as being psychologically different, not just cognitively different, but psychologically, emotionally different from his mother. He's now finding his unique self. Right, that's called getting the key out from under mother's pillow. He's differentiating himself. But he needs enough love for that to happen. So the theory is that around 6 months or 7 months, this happens. The child differentiates. Means his sense of self, his self-representation, his impression of himself, his understanding of himself is now different from his understanding of his mother and his impression of his mother. But if he's too traumatized and too frightened, he can't leave the mother. Fairbairn says the more frustrating the mother is, the more the baby needs the mother, the more the baby's going to cling to the mother. Now sometimes it gets to the point where the baby just becomes the mother. That's called identification with the aggressor. Now he's very fused in a negative symbiosis with the mother. That's called the narcissistic pattern. Okay. The main emotions are hate, envy, pessimism, greed, schadenfreude, grenvy, spite, vindictiveness. So they're kind of in this, they're angry because they didn't get enough love to leave the mother. So to cope with that, they identified with the mother. Then they're going to spend the rest of their lives putting others down because when they were a child, they felt put down by the mother. And they're in Sisyphus, they're going to do it their whole lives unless they become conscious of it. If they become conscious of it, then they can differentiate. Okay? So that's the whole goal here, is to become conscious. And these models and these quotes are in support of that, right? Okay. So yeah, this idea of the unconscious has been around for a long time, even before Socrates. It was around in Africa, apparently. Ehotope, is that his name? Ahop? I'll have to look that up. And in Eastern traditions, Confucius talked about the unconscious, Lao Tzu, and is it Chuang-Tzu and Mencius, I think. And there are a whole bunch of, I guess Buddha maybe is in there, a whole bunch of philosophers way back when, and they were talking about, in their language, the idea of the unconscious. And then I guess Socrates sort of made it more, created a slogan around it. He said, know thyself. But when you say know thyself, what is the self? The self is the totality, the body-mind totality of what you know about yourself, your conscious experiencing, and your unconscious self. We have an unconscious self, sometimes called the second self, or the secret self, or the stranger within, the one who walks with us, who's not like us, but who is us. Someone's living my life and I know nothing about him. In literature, it's the motif of the double. Robert Bly's metaphor, it's the bag that we drag behind us. By the age of 5, so much of who we are gets repressed and then put into this bag, right? Our golden ball is in the bag, our feeling self is in the bag, our aliveness of affect, the firebird is in the bag. So much is in this bag, and we drag it behind us. And Robert Bly says we spend the rest of our lives trying to get the contents back out and reintegrate it back into ourselves. Right? Now, this bag we drag behind us, sometimes called, Darrow calls it the skeleton. He says you want to welcome him, give him the best seat at the fireplace, treat him as an honored guest who had a right to be, who's a wise teacher, who's teaching you that there's a conquest of the self when you own your inner child of the past. So this bag can also be called the inner child of the past, the shadow soul, a lot of terms for it. So when we say know thyself, know the conscious self, know what you know about yourself, and know what you don't know about yourself. So you have to know both, right? And so much of who we are, we don't know, like the iceberg, right? So some people say, who we are, we mostly don't know, right? We forgot it. We couldn't even really think it and put it into terms. So it got disassociated and split off, or it got repressed, sort of the same thing. There's some debate about this, the difference between repression and split off and disassociation. That's maybe for another thread, another topic. Okay, so if you find yourself saying things and later you ask yourself, why did I say those things? That's from the unconscious. Maybe you're grieving and you're angry and now you're irritable towards people. Why are you irritable towards people? Well, there could be that the person is suffering the pain of a loss and he's in denial of it. And now his real feelings around the loss are coming out through his anger and disappointment and sadness. So he's irritable that way. Right? That's one of the benefits of self-reflection, is that if we get the key out, if we face the unconscious ambivalence with the mother, that means we heal the splits, that means we differentiate, we get the key out. Robert Bly says when you get the key out, then now you have the key to open the door that leads to getting the golden ball. The golden ball is our feeling self, right? That's in the Iron John story. So myths and fairy tales are describing the inner world, right? Now we're using jargon of the endopsychic structure and the architecture of the subconscious and so on. Bergler's metaphor as well. Masterson's model of the relational units, object relational units. The satisfying other linked to the satisfied self, that's a relational unit. The enticing other linked to the enticed self, that's a unit, a relational unit, to internal objects relating to each other in the unconscious. The rejecting other linked to a reject self. That's a relational unit. Master says, now you want to build a new relational unit. A representation of the other that supports the person's healing and psychological birth, that sees the person and respects the person as a person in their own right, linked to a part self representation that feels accepted and supported and seen as a person in their own right. Now you're healing when you build psychic structure. Healing, someone said, is building the psychic structure, right? Healing the psychic structure. We want to make the internal object relational world peaceful, harmonious. If it's so fragmented down there, it resembles a fairy tale or a myth, emotionally. That's an emotional representation of how it feels unconsciously. Right. The main psychological motif or pattern in myths and fairy tales is this defense mechanism of splitting goddess or demon or helpful creatures in the fairy tale and the frightening creatures in the fairy tale. Right. Now, when there's a wedding in a fairy tale, that means there's integration. You got something out from the bag. The bag can be represented as a forest or an ocean. It's vast, unknown. You find some treasure, you bring it back to yourself. Okay, that's reintegration. The metaphor for that is a marriage. So we had that symbol in previous videos about the fairy tale wedding, representing reintegration of ourselves. So when there's analysis, there's synthesis. So when there's synthesis, we bring things together, something new happens, there's new life, there's a healing takes place, a healing light. So maybe we should bring that up again quickly. So that's, I'm still not sure how to pronounce it, but on the left side there, that's what we know about ourselves. The sun there, the guy standing on the sun, that means consciousness. That's what we know about ourselves. This is sometimes called the masculine principle. Nothing to do with biology. Just the masculine principle simply means awareness, consciousness, ego consciousness. I don't know why they keep calling it the masculine principle, but anyways, maybe because it's more active and you're thinking and you're aware, so it has that association. Now, what we don't know about ourselves, okay, you see, it's the moonlight. It's dark. We don't see it. It's unknown. So the woman standing on the moon there, okay, that's called the feminine principle. Okay, our feeling self is there, right? Our ability to feel creativity and joy and a wide range of affect. Everything that we don't know about ourselves is in the unconscious. That's called the feminine principle. Our ability for empathy and compassion and maturity and health. Our feeling self is there. I feel, therefore I am. That's the feminine principle. I feel, therefore I am. That's the feminine principle. Now, when we bring consciousness to what we don't know about ourselves, okay, the metaphor, it's like a wedding. See, the guy and the girl are holding hands. That's like a wedding there. And then you see the dove. Means inner peace, inner reconciliation with ourselves. Again, these two characters are a metaphor. They're both within us, right? And then when we heal, when we reintegrate something that we don't know about ourselves, the life that was denied is now available. So you can see the star above the dove there, right? So that's a traditional metaphor for inner work. Right? I think the metaphor was, gold. What was it? Lead to gold. Something you don't know by yourself. That's lead, and you bring it into awareness. Now it's gold. That's somebody's metaphor. I'm not too familiar with that. Okay. So maybe we'll move on to the next one here. Okay, children have difficulty in understanding their feelings, their reactions, and the reactions of others. Thus, transferences or projections reflect past actual relationships along with wishes for solutions and imagined causes for difficulties. Children tend to exaggerate and imagine that their sins are great. That's the moral defense, right? repressed, and thus out of conscious awareness. Unfortunately, they can continue to exert considerable influence. Although it may seem ludicrous for a grown person to hold such beliefs, that they're so guilty, the power of the unconscious with its fantasies and fears is considerable. One reason for this is that the unconscious is not really altered after the age of 5 without self-reflection, repairing the ego, conscious reintegration of what we disowned about ourselves, called shadow work, healing the splits, differentiating, getting the key out from under mother's pillow, mourning our losses, etc. Transference not only refers to past relationships that impinge upon the present, but also reflects a vehicle between the unconscious and the conscious parts of the mind. Again, transference not only refers to past relationships that impinge upon the present, but also reflects a vehicle between the unconscious and unconscious parts of the mind. So I think that's the most important point here. Transference, so you're reliving, you're reactivating, you're replaying your childhood trauma with your parents, and you're bringing it into the present with the people with you in the present. That's a vehicle. This repetition compulsion, this transference of past into the present, reliving the past into the present to see if you can get a better outcome. This is the vehicle, right? Between the unconscious and the conscious parts of the mind. So as mentioned before, the unconscious ego is projecting these internal objects into the present. It gets the person, if they're not conscious of it, they're going to respond as if it's the childhood scene all over again. Now, the non-threatening substitute other isn't the mother, bad mother, but the person wants to create that non-threatening substitute as the bad mother. So he'll lie to himself, create delusions, logical fallacies, rationalizations, pick some reason. It doesn't matter. He's emotionally compelled to find some way to think that something on the outside is his frightening mother. Right? That's the repetition compulsion. Now, the conscious mind would recognize this. Now the person can own his projections, get a sense of his internal object relations world, or his memories, let's say. And now we're being a caring witness to ourselves. So we're healing the inner child. Our inner child wants witnessing. Our inner child of the past wants to be seen by us. And that's how the psyche is doing it. He's projecting it onto people in the present. Right? So yeah, he's emphasizing the same idea. Why does a person, remember that movie we played about 2 weeks ago? What's it called again? The Lady in the Dark with Ginger Rogers. She said she went to a therapist. She was having an issue, so she went to the therapist and she did the work there. And her conclusion with the therapist was, isn't it silly how a grown adult can be dominated by fears and experiences from childhood? Here's a grown adult, but they're living their lives based on the fears from their childhood. And she said, isn't that silly? So she was making the link between the past is past and the present is present. But to do that, to get to that point, you have to witness your inner child of the past. You have to validate what happened in the past. You can't just ignore it and brush it aside. If you do, the inner child of the past will try other ways to get your attention. Right? It'll project more. It'll give you more extreme opinions. It can lead. The body can bear the burden. The person can get physically ill if we keep ignoring the inner child of the past, because it's stressful down there. There's a lot of energy down there. If the unconscious ego has memories of the loving mother, but he also has memories of the enticing mother and the rejecting mother, if the frustrating memories outweigh the satisfying, that's a huge discomfort. So that's why they project outward, or see it or attribute outwardly, to feel some momentary relief. But it's just for the moment. And then they do it again to get that relief moment, and they do it again. Sisyphus, so they keep on doing it. They're not healing. Healing takes place when we witness Okay, in other words, we forgive our parents. At the end of the day, we have to forgive our parents. We have to recognize that our parents were caught in their existential dilemma. They were caught in their situation, in their net of trauma. They were caught there. They were stuck there with their arrested development. The parents may have had prenatal distress syndrome, birth trauma, intergenerational trauma, situational trauma, developmental trauma, trauma with the siblings, family members, and the environment. There could have been school shock, trauma at the dentist's office, trauma while getting the tonsils out. There could have been forced relocation situation. There could be other traumas in the environment. So the parents were caught in their existential dilemma. That means we can face the truth of understanding that they couldn't offer secure attachment style. So as we work towards forgiving our parents, we heal ourselves. So the quote is, forgiveness and the willingness to heal and be happy are the same. You can't be healed and happy if you still have unconscious anger towards the mother that you're denying. You're denying it through reaction formation by thinking the mother's a goddess. Okay, that's splitting defense mechanism. And counterphobia, reaction formation. The unconscious feeling, you're afraid to admit that you're hurt by the mother, that you're angry at the mother. So you flip it and say your mother's all wonderful. Reaction formation. So when we face the truth, we face the unconscious ambivalence. Now the split images of goddess and demon can come together. They meld and create a new image. So the spark on top, a little wedding there, new image, this healing spark. And the result is an image of the other as realistic. So emotionally, we see the parent as a person caught in their existential dilemma, right? They're not in our unconscious fantasy a goddess or a demon. They're emotionally, psychologically, we recognize in our invisible world that the parent, or our understanding of the other, the parent, the mother, the father, they were just people. We have to get to that place where they're just people, so on. Okay, so a little more about the repetition compulsion. Okay, neurotics feel compelled to repeat difficult and troublesome aspects of the past by bringing them into the present. Transference is an example of the repetition compulsion since it reflects past events being brought into the present. So he was making the point, if you don't believe in the repetition compulsion, of how it brings the troublesome aspects of the past into the present, well, think about transference. Well, that's bringing the past into the present. So that's a clue to that. Okay, each client has a repetition compulsion that he or she enacts or tries to enact with others. These repetitions are typically unconscious. The issues are of lifelong duration and reflect the client's typical way of relating as unfinished business with the mother. Okay, so the person has unfinished business with the mother. That's why neurotics are unconsciously battling with the mother. They want to show up the mother by acting like her. So if they're a very disagreeable or unpleasant person, they're trying to say to everyone or to someone, to themselves, to whoever, grief is healed when it's witnessed by a caring other. They're looking for a caring other. Ideally, they should be their own caring other. But the theory is they're looking for a caring other. They're trying to say, look how terrible my mother was. Because he's doing those terrible things to others. So in that novel from the 60s, the mother exploited, objectified, and used the child. That person grew up and then exploited others. And his rationalizations were the same. He was using the same arguments and excuses that his mother told him when he was a child. He didn't make the connection. So that's the repetition compulsion. In other words, he's in battle with the mother by trying to show everyone how bad the mother was, by being the mother and repeating what she did to others, to say that when he was a baby, that's what his mother did to him. The bad things, the hurtful things he's doing to others, he's trying to say those are the things that his mother did to him. Okay, so he's still stuck there with the mother in this negative symbiosis, in this negative fusion with the mother. Okay, now this negative symbiosis, this negative fusion, this battle with the mother to try to show her up, to try to leave her, to try to differentiate from her, to get enough love from her that he didn't get, takes so many forms, and we've covered a few of the patterns already in previous videos. The narcissistic pattern, the closet narcissistic pattern, hiding behind power struggles as a character defense pattern, the hostile provocative attachment style one, the schizoid pattern, the one that resembles the character Iago from literature, the symbiotic character disorder, and a few other patterns. So those were covered in previous videos. I won't redo them here. But the point is, if there's arrested development prior to the age of 6 months, preventing the split images from coming together. Remember, the baby does create these split images temporarily because of his small size and because of the huge anxiety. He has to create this defense mechanism of splitting. But by the age of 6 months, the child gets it. He gets it because he got enough love. The child needs enough love to get it, to get that the mother is one person. If he doesn't get enough love, he's too frightened, so he's still using the defense mechanism of splitting. Splitting is meant to be existential hearsay by the age of 3. But if there's a trauma there, okay, he's going to replay it and repeat it using immature infantile defense mechanism. The main ones, he's going to keep on using the splitting. Now with the splitting, an outcropping of it, an extension of it, is projective identification. Projecting onto others, coaxing others to play a negative role, getting others to feel your uncomfortable affect, getting others to play a role in your childhood, babyhood scene, emotionally somehow, and so on. Okay, that's what we mean by unfinished business with the mother. He's still battling with the mother by recreating the scene with the mother. That's what he means by unfinished business with the mother. Okay, traumatic incidents, developmental trauma incidents. Okay, the person feels plagued by them and seeks resolution. He or she continues to repeat and to reenact the trauma in order to understand and overcome it. So that's a nice way. This comes from a popular self-help book. So he writes very clearly here. He says in the Repetition Compulsion, the purpose is to repeat it, to understand and overcome it. You want to understand what happened in childhood so that you can overcome it, or master it, or handle it, or deal with it, get a better outcome. He says it simply, to understand it and overcome it. Okay, that's the positive intention of the Repetition Compulsion. That's the positive intention is to get the person's own conscious ego to recognize it. That's helping the conscious ego to make the unconscious conscious. That's the whole idea of knowing thyself. The repetition compulsion is not voluntary. Those in its grip are not aware that they are acting out and repeating a forgotten, painful childhood situation. Therapists can unwittingly become participants in their reenactments. So that's the skill of the therapist, to not collude and just repeat the childhood scene and not be aware of it. The therapist is there to help the client be aware of it. The therapist is an extension of the person's conscious ego. So he's sort of like a surrogate ego. So the client is borrowing the therapist's ego to help the client expand his ego. Now, if the therapist doesn't offer his conscious ego, and he's just going to repeat the childhood scene, he's not helpful. He's actually more hurtful. It's an insult because the client is trusting him and is paying him, and he's just re-traumatizing him. See, a lot of therapists, some therapists have the narcissistic pattern. They use their power and their position to enact their unconscious sadism. That's what they're saying. In that same book by the Hubermans here, they were saying that some therapists, they use their power to enact out their emotional sadism. So the client comes, he's vulnerable. The therapist projects his own wounded child onto the vulnerable client. The The therapist identifies with his abusive mother and then sees and hurts the client. Now he's getting paid, so he's entitled, so he feels inflated, he's got more power, and he's exploiting that power. Okay. So this is a corrupt therapist. So people with a narcissistic pattern aren't qualified. But see, people are sometimes fooled by people with a narcissistic pattern because all of their energy is for anger. People think that's strength. So people with the codependent pattern are looking for a parental substitute, and they think, well, that looks kind of strong. I guess that's called sweet lemons. A person with the codependent pattern will rationalize that this angry person, well, that's strength. That's parental-ish like. So they'll trust that person. Later on, they realize, oh boy. So most self-help books are written by those with the codependent pattern. Codependent pattern, their trauma took place between 6 months and 36 months. They also didn't achieve the psychological birth. So that's why they have inner conflicts. Their fixation is at the rejection level of not getting enough support to complete the separation individuation process. Their anxiety is what's called depressive anxiety. They don't want to hurt the people they love. So they have love and gratitude, but they didn't get enough support to reach the psychological birth. Now, the prior stage, the anxiety is more persecutory, it's more severe, right? So greater defense mechanism being used, right? So all of the energy there is mainly anger and spite and so on. So they appear superficially like they're so strong because all their energy is towards these 2 or 3 emotions: greed, envy, hate. That's it. They think, oh, they look pretty strong. They're preserving their infantile megalomania, and so the codependent is a little confused about this. Because he's never seen an adult. He also doesn't know what an adult is. He never achieved a psychological birth. So people with the narcissistic pattern, well, they don't care. They feel entitled. Right? A person with a narcissistic pattern, okay, just briefly again, the baby's image of what he needs is an inexhaustible flow of goodness. The breast was an inexhaustible flow of goodness. Now the baby didn't get that, so he's never satiated. He never got satiated. He never got that feeling of enough. Right? There was a problem there with the feeding. Right? Or maybe the breast was not even a breast, it was a bottle or something on a schedule. It's called an alexithymic, unfeeling breast, not a psychosomatic breast. So there's a coldness there, but so that he didn't even get the mother's felt love through the feeding. But still, the image of the breast or the bottle from the baby's point of view is an inexhaustible flow of goodness. No, he didn't get that. He just wanted to receive it. He didn't want to own the bottle or the breast. He just wanted to receive mother's love. Now, in the repetition compulsion, he thinks it's not enough just to receive. You're not going to receive. To master that trauma, it's better to own symbolic mother. So whatever represents goodness in later life, that is symbolic mother, he wants to possess it. That's greed. Now he wants to own things, material, money, goods, or other, whatever looks good, or he wants to possess it. Now, if he can't possess it, it bothers him because it reminds him of not getting enough love. It triggers the trauma. Now that's where envy comes in, hatred of the good. Now, if he does see the goodness, whatever form that takes, spoiled or damaged, he feels gleeful. That's the tension relief, stress relief. So that's the Schadenfreude. He was tense about his anger at the envy. He sees the envy spoiled. Now he feels gleeful. So that's the Schadenfreude. Right? Now, so the main emotions with the person with the narcissistic pattern is hate. Okay? He's angry, so he's greedy. He's envious. So the grenvy goes together. Greed and envy, it's grenvy. Now, if you question him about it, now that's his identity. That's all he has. He's identified with the aggressor. If you question him about it, he'll be vindictive. Because to question him about it means he has to face the original unconscious anxiety of not getting the love that he needed. So that's the persecutory anxiety, even the survival anxiety. So he's very, very scared about that. So he'll become his spite becomes compounded even. So that's why people with the narcissistic pattern, they don't like feedback. They don't want to hear it. They want admiration. They want to be served. They want to be admired, or they want to feel entitled. They want to be given things. In one self-help book, a person with the narcissistic pattern was quoted as saying, well, I granted him the gift of letting him take care of me or something. It was my gift to them. That's how arrogant, very narcissistic. Because from the baby's point of view, he is entitled to receive. The baby is entitled to receive enough love. Now, if the baby's angry, he's entitled to be angry at his mother and still be loved by the mother. Now, the narcissistic pattern is doing that same thing. He feels entitled to be angry, and he still feels like the victim. Because the baby was the victim when he's angry. So the narcissistic pattern, when he hurts others, he feels like the victim. That's the template from that, is the babyhood time, at the breast. Now, the baby still has the right, was entitled to receive the love, even though he's angry. The narcissistic pattern feels he can be angry and spiteful and still receive the love. He's entitled. He doesn't get that he's repeating the breastfeeding trauma. He doesn't get that. And Lucy Holmes says people with a narcissistic pattern see others as symbolic breasts to be consumed and discarded when not useful, and so on. So that's one of the threads in this series, the narcissistic pattern. We've had a few mentions of it so far. Repetition compulsion is another thread, which we're adding to here. Okay, one form this repetition compulsion can take is the rescue fantasy. This client's unconscious rescue fantasy is reminiscent of a young child's expectation that their parents are all-powerful and omniscient. Marriages are fertile ground for transference reactions. He hopes that his marriage will undo and repair past hurts. Okay, if it's a conscious marriage, if the partners are conscious, it can. The marriage can be healing. If they're conscious and they talk and they make I statements, it's very healing. If they're not conscious, if it has this unconscious rescue fantasy aspect to it, okay, as the I love you, you're perfect, now change, that play, that comedy play, right? So the person met someone who unconsciously reminded them of their frustrating parent. Oh, he loves them, he's perfect, just like the parent, now change. So he's going to try to coax that person to change. Now there's the power struggle. Now the other partner's doing the same thing. So now they're battling with each other. Who's going to be the mother for the other? Marriages are fertile ground for transference reactions. Because it's intimate, it's a close relationship. So, again, the repetition compulsion can be seen in the marriage situation, right? Each partner wants the other to make up for, but they can't. No adult can do that. No adult can morph into it. They can't. It's as if the person wants to travel back on a time machine. The partner is the good breast mother, and they are the little baby. They can't do that. You see, it's completely impossible unless someone. See, even these sci-fi movies about time machine. You see, that's in reference maybe to some of these unconscious fantasies, I think. Yeah, we won't go into the idea of time. See, in the unconscious, it's timeless. You see there. Okay. Okay. A little bit more on projective identification as an outcome of splitting. Projective identification is a form of communication for a client who has no other avenue of expression available. Her only available mode of communication is by creating her feelings in another person. Okay, again, the template is the baby is bonded to his mother. The baby has a feeling. He sends out that feeling. It's as if he's communicating his feeling to his mother, even though the baby's fused with the mother. But the observer can see that the baby's trying to send the message of his feeling to his mother. it's as if, so it resembles now the mother feeling it because they're fused. Now it looks like the mother's feeling it. So the mother gets the message, she feels it, she metabolizes it, she offers her maternal reverie, she responds, she loves the baby, so she provides the comfort that the baby needs. So there's that back and forth between the baby and the mother. Now if that doesn't take place, okay, the adult version of this, in the repetition compulsion of it, is called projective identification. You want others to feel what you're not feeling, with the theoretical hope that the other person can soothe the person. But it can't. There's different degrees of this. They can do it in minor, for little things, but not for the major things, you know. So that's what it means by creating her feelings in another person, getting the other person to feel what you're not feeling yourself. Now sometimes this is very benign. Two friends get together. The first friend is feeling something, but he doesn't know that he's feeling it. The second friend is starting to feel something that he wasn't feeling. And the second friend thinks, hey buddy, I'm starting to feel such and such. I'm wondering if you too perhaps are also feeling such and such. And the first friend might say, come to think of it, I'm glad you brought it up, I am. Now they can talk about it. So it's very benign that way. The friend can handle it, he can bring it up, they can talk about it. No one's overwhelmed. It's progressive emotional communication. It's helpful that way, right? Sometimes it's too much. If the person is feeling a very heavy feeling, the person may think, well, I can't get the other person to feel it, but if I try, and maybe if he does feel it to some degree, or no, rather I should say it this way, the quote is misery loves company. If the person is feeling something that he doesn't know about himself, that he doesn't know that he's feeling, and he gets the other person to feel that by pushing his buttons, by being negative or doing something, then he feels relief, because misery loves company. So he's externalized what he's... So we had that example about the two women who were best friends. The first woman was depressed, but she didn't know it. She made her other friend openly depressed, and the first friend felt relieved. So they were connected that way. That was the basis of their friendship. When that second friend caught on to it and didn't want to be depressed, the first friend said goodbye. Because the only use for that second friend was to express what they're denying. So that's the repetition compulsion by using. So the repetition compulsion is expressed by the use of projective identification that comes from the splitting defense mechanism, which comes from the unconscious ambivalence, which comes from when the person was a baby, the mother was more frustrating than loving. Projective identification occurs when a client cannot tolerate dysphoric affects and beliefs and projects them into someone else. The projection is such that the recipient feels the disowned affect. Projective identification is an externalization of a feeling state, but it is a projection into another person. It is an attempt to rid oneself of what the projector perceives as badness within himself. So the projector can't accept something about himself. He wants to coax the other person to have it, feel it, act it out, express it, believe it. So that's the idea about that. Now this comes from the splitting defense mechanism, right? So, okay, so what does the therapist do? Okay, TQ7. As the transference unfolds with the client, the therapist, rather than enacting this relationship with the client, focuses attention on it and draws parallels between what is happening in the therapy, what happens in the client's current relationships, and what happened in his or her past relationships. Okay, TQ8, interpretations which connect the actual life situation with past experiences and with the transference situation are called total interpretations. So this is a key thread here in this series. An interpretation links three parts. So the person has a chief complaint in life, that's his repetition compulsion. The therapist's job is to see the unconscious in action. So the therapist sees how it started. Okay. Now, it's happening, it's being relived in the here and now. So those three parts are connected. Right? So in that movie, I Love Huckabees, there was an example of this. The therapist said, you know, Albert, you have this pattern, this recurring pattern in your present life where you betray yourself and you betray your feelings and all that. You know, you learned it in childhood. Remember what you said? This happened and your mother betrayed you. So you were betrayed in childhood. Now you identified with that and you're doing it to yourself. That's why in the here and now, in the present, you hide the truth. You encrypt the truth. You don't want to know what you're feeling. So you're betraying yourself by projecting your feelings. That's an interpretation. So that little scene is worth the whole price of the movie, if you ask me. It's a comedy movie. It's okay. They're poking fun at the self-help movement and all that. But that little point there, I just tried to summarize. That's worth the price of the movie. You know, called I Love Huckabees, 2000 and something. The one funny thing about that movie was the therapists didn't like to be called therapists. They wanted to inflate their... they called themselves existential detectives. So maybe, I wondered, maybe they wanted to be above the other therapists, so they're existential detectives. You know, they're more... it emphasizes the psychoanalytic perspective to be more conscious. Anyways. Okay, so these quotes add to previous material. So I'll just end on here with a song. So this song is the theme song to this series. It's called Windmills of the Mind, sung by Katja Epstein. It's sung in German, and it's her cover rendition of Windmills of the Mind. That's the theme song, because in each video we're covering a few windmills of the mind.
Nachts, wenn die Straßen plötzlich still sind, wenn die Stadt auf einmal schweigt, wenn aus steinernen Kaminen stumm der Mond zum Himmel steigt, wenn es hier in meinem Zimmer leer und einsam wird um mich, suche ich in den dunklen Schatten die Erinnerung an dich, und ich fühle, wie ein Augenblick zur Ewigkeit gerinnt, wenn das Spinnrad meiner Träume längst zerrissene Fäden spinnt und sich leis zu drehen beginnt, wie sich Mühlen drehen im Wind.
Okay, so thank you very much. This has been TQ 961 and 962, and a redo of TQ 7 and 8 about interpretations. So we covered the idea of the iceberg, the unconscious. So much of who we are we don't know about ourselves. So that's the metaphor of the iceberg, the bulk of it being under the water there. And the part of the iceberg that's above the water, that's a metaphor for what we know about ourselves. So the theory is this unknown that we don't know about ourselves is pulling us, it's leading our lives into the repetition compulsion. Right? Repeating the childhood scene to try to heal from the past. It's an open wound. When the baby didn't get enough love, that's a trauma there. Trauma is an open wound. It's painful. That's why the person is repeating the scene to try to heal that wound. It's an open wound. You can't just wish it away or push it away or deny it away. It's an open wound. It happened. It's real. It's a true experience. The baby didn't get the love that he needed. That's a trauma. That's the theory about repetition compulsion. And the unconscious is the record keeper of the repetition compulsion, and the driver and the the organizer of the repetition compulsion. Mysterious influence. So one model of the unconscious is the endopsychic structure described by Fairbairn, where we have internal objects and we're relating to these internal objects. Our energy inwardly is relating to these internal objects. There's a dynamic going on here. So a lot of our energy is devoted to this internal relationship, which can be tiring, right? Now our conscious ego relates to the external world, and our unconscious ego is relating to this internal world. And we don't want too much of our unconscious, of our ego to be unconscious, relating to this unconscious world. That can cause a person to kind of avoid practical, the interpersonal relationships, you know. And there's different degrees of this. Interesting ending, right? Yeah, I'm not sure what to make of that ending, but it's okay. It works, right? Maybe just a continuation of the exploration, the continuation of the mystery. Maybe that violin's there at the end. It goes on. The enduring perplexity of existence, someone said. Another metaphor an old metaphor was the idea that the unconscious is this planet up there in the sky that we're not aware of. How did we become aware of it? Well, other things are happening in the galaxy. That's because then from that we backtrack and realize, oh, there's a planet there. That's the unconscious. So this planet, this unknown planet, is our unconscious and has a force of itself. Right. Okay, again, Socrates said, know thyself. Okay, the therapist is an intellectual midwife. The therapist is an intellectual midwife. Man's main task is to give psychological birth to himself. If the person didn't get it at the age of 3 with the secure attachment style, that's what ideally happens, then it's up to the person themselves to give psychological birth to themselves. Now, if they're lucky, they can get help with the therapist, and he can become a psychological midwife, an intellectual midwife, to help the person give birth to himself. If we don't give psychological birth to ourselves, we're just repeating a childhood drama with the mother. We're projecting the mother onto others, or we've identified with the mother and projected our wounded self onto others, or we project the loving mother onto others and think others are so wonderful. That's called the sweet lemons. That's a codependent pattern. So the codependent pattern, they're the hopeless romantics. They always think others are so wonderful, and they're blaming themselves. They think it's their fault. Actually, they're close to the psychological birth. So this ancient idea of how the therapist is an intellectual midwife reminds therapists in the present day of their created methods. They're there to help the client achieve the psychological birth by making the unconscious conscious. That heals the internal object relations world, meaning the split images come together. That leads to whole object relations. That leads to differentiation, getting the key out from under mother's pillow. Okay? That means when a person gets the key out from under mother's pillow and they've achieved differentiation, they have a sense of themselves. They now feel, oh, I know who I am. The plumb line is to the self now. The life force is to the self. Okay? And with the mourning process, okay, that allows mourning process, that allows ontological security, sense of self, basic trust, and then access to the real self. That's the real psychological birth, when you have access to the real self. The real self is a part of the person. Okay, those screeching violins means it continues, right? The healing journey continues. And One of the capacities of the real self is that it allows the person to know themselves and to be themselves. That's self-esteem. And it's meaningful for a person to express their uniqueness. But to find their uniqueness, okay, that's the treasure in the bag there. They have to get the key. Because the golden ball is in a cage. And this cage is in the bag. So you have to get the key. So the therapist helps to the client, or each of us is tasked to forgive our parents. That's why on Mother's Day, that's the day when mothers come clean to their adult children and confess. And Mother's Day is the day when we don't praise when we forgive them. So we would say to our parents, look, I want to forgive you. Help me to forgive you. Tell me what happened. Tell me the truth, and it'll help me to forgive you. I want to achieve the psychological birth. The mother might say, well, I don't want to be alone. If you become psychologically autonomous, you're not going to need me so much. Oh, that's not necessarily true. I'll just relate to you as an adult. Maybe I'm more helpful to you. But emotionally, you won't need me, and I'll feel abandoned. Well, you got to come clean. Look, you're in your 60s. You got to come clean now, or 70s, or 80s, or whatever it is. So, on Mother's Day, women, the proposal is that women with adult children write letters to their adult children, coming clean, the whole truth, nothing but the truth. What happened at the birth? What was the feeding like? Was there breastfeeding, or was it bottle feeding? Was it scheduled or not scheduled? How much crying took place? Was there kicking in the womb? Did the baby kick a lot? That's a trauma there. That's distress when the baby's kicking in the womb. That's not a healthy thing when the baby's kicking in the womb. He's stressed out. Maybe the cord is wrapped around him and he's not getting enough oxygen. He's kicking, he's frantic, he's frightened. Did the mother say, oh, look, my baby's going to be a soccer player? Oh, come on. So the mother has to come clean about how ignorant she was. That'll help to recognize that the mother was psychologically incomplete. Meaning, we recognize the truth that the mother didn't get a secure attachment style from her mother. That's called intergenerational trauma. When each woman passes down the insecure attachment style. That's the intergenerational trauma. So we want to heal intergenerational trauma. When we give psychological birth to ourselves, we heal intergenerational trauma. Right? Once someone offers their child a secure attachment style, intergenerational trauma has ended. Right? We can read the Enneagram. That helps us to get an idea of what our parents. That's a quick way of understanding our parents. There are 9 types in the Enneagram. Okay, these 9 types are based on descriptions of these 9 types are based on both the secure attachment style and the insecure attachment style. So there are 18 descriptions. So you want to recognize which type the parent was. Chances are, if it's an insecure attachment style, it's the unhealthy description of those 9 types. And the truth will set us free. So now we're accepting the truth that our parents, of their situation, we're forgiving them. Forgiveness of the parent leads to healing of ourselves. Forgiveness and the willingness to be happy are the same, they said. Reparation of the other and reparation of the self are the same. Someone said you can't even really tell them apart. If you're offering reparation to the other, you're healing yourself at the same time. It's a mystery that way. Okay, the vehicle, yeah. So this transference not only refers to past relationships that impinge upon the present, but also reflects a vehicle between the unconscious and the unconscious parts of the mind. So transference, projection, repetition compulsion, projective identification, reaction formation, magical, the use of infantile immature defense mechanisms, being aware of it. All of these things are a vehicle between the unconscious and the conscious parts of the mind. We want to make the unconscious conscious. That's the wedding there in the fairy tale and the spark of life and inner peace and inner reconciliation. So we're looking for inner peace, inner harmony. Inner harmony is achieved when the split images of the mother in the unconscious fantasy world of goddess and demon come together to form an image of the mother that she was a person. To get there, we have to forgive the mother. To do that, we have to get to know the mother and the father. Robert Bly says, you got to interview your parents. Chances are they won't confess. They'll say that they'll shrug their shoulders. They don't know what you're talking about. That means they're in deep denial. Get what information you can, right? And forgive them. Their pain is too great. They can't be conscious. So they're in deep denial. So but to recognize that helps us to forgive them. So we have to see that. That's why we study defense mechanisms. If we recognize which defense mechanisms are our parents using, that helps us to forgive them. So we have to learn about defense mechanisms. Right? Okay, the next one here is neurotics feel compelled to repeat difficult aspects of the past by bringing them into the present. So again, Berger's metaphor, every neurotic carries meaning everyone with an insecure attachment style or arrested development or developmental trauma or fixation at the rejection level of not getting enough love to differentiate, or fixation at not getting enough support to complete the separation individuation process. Okay, every neurotic carries with them a record, a music LP, long playing vinyl music disc record. They carry it with them everywhere they go. They only have this one record. Every time they see a record player in the present, they play that record. So they're bringing the past into the present to try to understand it and overcome it. Each client has a repetition compulsion that he or she enacts or tries to enact with others. These repetitions are typically unconscious. Okay, the issues are of a lifelong duration, and because it's lifelong, the unconscious doesn't know time, so it can last the whole life, and reflect the client's typical ways of relating as a representation of the unfinished business with the mother. Okay, so again, Berger calls that the grand design. You're trying to show up the mother, or punish the mother, or reveal the mother, or expose the mother, because you've given up trying to get enough love from the mother. So now you just want to expose her and get revenge on the mother somehow by telling the world how bad she was, and sometimes by imitating her. That might be the only way to communicate it. Because the baby doesn't have words, he only has actions, gestures. Berger calls that a negative magic gesture. Okay, again, traumatic incidents. The person feels plagued by them and seeks resolution. He or she continues to repeat and to reenact trauma in order to understand and overcome it. Okay, we shall overcome, I guess. Meaning we understand the trauma, we forgive the parents, then we overcome it, right? And find emotional freedom that way. If I may borrow the slogan. Repetition compulsion is not voluntary. Yeah. Obviously, it's a compulsion. It's not by choice. The person is compelled to do it. It's not voluntary. They're in the grip of not. Those in its grip are not aware that they are acting out and repeating a forgotten painful childhood situation. Therapists sometimes get sucked in and just go along with the repetition. So they're just reinforcing the trauma. That's no help. The therapist has to offer interpretations to repair the ego, to build the client's ego. The last video was the therapist has to help the client become his own existential detective, to become his own therapist. The role of the therapist is to help the client to be his own therapist, to teach him how to fish, to be his own therapist. Remember, to fish. So that's the water, the unconscious, fish, bringing the contents up from the unconscious. Metaphor there. Robert Bly uses that one. So the guy is fishing. The unconscious, the water is the unconscious. You get up a fish, you eat it, you own it, you integrate it. So the metaphor is you're bringing up something that's in the bag and the unconscious, and you're reintegrating it, you're re-owning it. That's the marriage there. You're bringing it back to yourself. So he's eating the fish that he... Yep. So the therapist is helping the client how to fish, to be his own therapist, to own what's in the unconscious. So the fish is the metaphor of some aspect of ourselves that's been repressed. So we want to get those fishes, you know, and eat them and own them, integrate them back into ourselves. Yeah, this repetition compulsion can take place in marriage through the unconscious rescue fantasy. Okay, projective identification is a form of communication. Okay, non-verbal communication. He doesn't have any other way of explaining it. How does a person talk about his childhood trauma? He doesn't have words, conscious memories. The hippocampus doesn't come online until the age of 3. So how does he talk about his memories prior to the age of 3? He can only act them out. He can only just do it in his actions. That's how he's communicating what happened prior to the age of 3. And he's motivated during that phase because that's when developmental trauma takes place from birth to 3. With enough love, at the age of 3, he achieves a psychological birth. You know? Okay, projective identification. You want others to own what you're not feeling. Okay, so I guess I'll just leave it here. And again, about the idea of an interpretation. So the movie I Love Huckabees offers an example of an interpretation. So what the person is doing regularly in their life, they're sort of conscious of it. They're doing it in the here and now, so they're conscious of it. And you link the conscious, the pre-conscious, with the unconscious. Now the therapist offers that third missing piece, the unconscious. And he has to be like a poet. He has to say it in a way that links all three together. Someone compared an analyst like a poet. He's giving you personalized poems for you, you know, kind of thing. But a very good poem is for everybody, you know. This wonderful song is the German cover rendition of Windmills of the Mind by Katja Epstein. Very clear. She sung this when she was very early in her career. So what she just said there, that's Windmills of the Mind. Okay, so I don't see the blue jay or the fox, but maybe next time we'll see the blue jay or the fox. Okay, so I'll just leave you here then. So thank you very much. This has been TQ 968, 962, and a redo of TQ 7 and 8, part 1 of 2. Yeah. There's a part 2 of TQ 7 and 8. So I just redid the part 1 here. Okay, so the main theme was about the iceberg here, the unconscious, repetition compulsion, projective identification, and interpretation. So we'll add more quotes on these themes. I'll just wait for the song to end here. Okay. So thank you very much. Bye for now.